Hey, what's going on, folks? This is Keith, and you're watching Barbour's Auto Help. Thank you so much for watching. In today's episode, we're going to be replacing the transmission mount on my '07 Ford Edge equipped with a 3.5 liter V6. Now, while this is an '07 Ford Edge with a 3.5 liter, this information will apply in part or in whole to many of the Ford Edges throughout the years. I'm not sure what the year swath is on this, but this information may be applied to many other Ford Edges out there. Always verify and check your repair manual to make sure that this information is applicable to your vehicle. Now, before we get started, we're going to make sure that the vehicle is parked on a flat, level, stable surface, such as a concrete slab. We're also going to apply the parking brake. We're going to make sure that the vehicle is turned off, and we're going to remove the key, and we're going to chalk the rear tires. Now, the transmission mount lives right up underneath all this mess on the driver's side of the engine compartment. We'll start out by disconnecting the negative battery clamp from the battery, and we're going to isolate it from the battery. Next, we'll need to remove our air filter housing, or the top part of our air filter housing, and the air inlet duct right here. We'll start out by disconnecting the mass airflow sensor. Now, the mass airflow sensor connector has a little red lock on it. You can see it right here. You're going to stick your fingernails up underneath the red lock and pull rearward on it. I just took and pulled that rearward like that. And then there's a little lock right here just behind that red lock. You're going to push in on it like so and pull rearward on that connector there. Now, on the air filter housing here, you have two clips. You'll need to release those just like so. And on the air duct going to the throttle body, you'll see right there, there's a hose clamp. You can either use an 8mm socket on it, or you can use a flat blade screwdriver on that. We'll need to loosen that up so that we can remove it from the throttle body. Now, for me, I find it easiest to use a 1/4" drive ratchet with a long 1/4" drive extension, and then a universal adapter right here, and then an 8mm socket. And then I go in right through here, and I'll loosen up that hose clamp that way. Now, there is a hose on this side of the air duct that you'll need to remove from the air duct. You just simply pull it straight out like that. And then there's a PCV breather tube that goes to the air duct right through here. We'll need to release that as well. Now, there's a little lock tab right here that you kind of got to pull to the side a little bit, and I'll show you a little bit better once we get it out, what's going on with that. And then once you pull this lock tab here, get that to focus. Pull that lock tab here rearward just a little bit, and then to the side, you can pull this right off of that nipple right here on the air duct. Now, at this point, go ahead and pull up on the top part of the air filter housing. And then when you want to release the locks in the back, you have to slide it this way. Just like that. Then I like to put my hand through here and grab the air duct and kind of wiggle it off of the throttle body. Like that. Just pull the whole thing out and set it to the side. All right, let's go ahead and remove our air filter. Now, we're going to need to remove the bottom part of our air filter housing here. There's two bolts here. They both have 8mm heads on them. We're going to need to remove those. Take this bracket, set it to the side. I like to keep my bolts going back in the same holes there. That way I keep everything nice and orderly and in place. That way I'm not confused as to what bolt goes into which hole when I'm assembling the vehicle. Now, this air filter housing here, the bottom part, this actually just pulls straight up. You gotta tug it a little bit hardly there, and it comes right up just like that. These cleats go into little receptacles down there, and that's what locks this into the engine compartment there. All right, let's go ahead and disconnect our positive battery clamp here. You gotta loosen this 10mm up just a little bit to unclamp it. Wiggle it right off just like that. All right, let's remove our little retainer cleat here. This has an 8mm head on it. I'm gonna loosen that and remove it. And that's our retainer cleat. If you can call it a cleat, I guess you call it a cleat. That's what holds the battery in place there. Once we have that removed, the whole battery comes right out. I'm gonna go ahead and remove it, set it to the side. Next, we'll need to remove our battery tray. And you'll see you have an electrical connector right here. We're gonna need to remove that from the tray before we can remove the tray. All right, stick this up underneath here like this. Set that to the side. Now this is a better image of that electrical connector. It's got a little Christmas tree rivet that goes down in the hole on that battery tray. That's what that popper is used for, to remove that. You just stick the fork right through there and pop it right out. Now you have a 10mm nut right here, a 10mm bolt, and a 10mm bolt right here. We're going to go ahead and remove those. Now we can pull straight up and pull this out. And now our transmission mount is exposed. It's right there. Now let's get to taking it out. Now before we go to remove this transmission mount here, we want to make sure that we can support the weight of this transmission without that mount in place there. That mount is responsible for supporting the weight of the transmission and part of the engine weight as well. So once we remove it, it's just going to be kind of floating there. So I like to use a jack with a 2x4, and then I place the jack up underneath the transmission, kind of where the center of gravity is, and then I jack the jack up just a little bit to make contact with the transmission, and then I might give it another pump or two just to make sure that that jack is going to support the weight of the transmission when I remove the transmission mount. We're not going to jack it up so much that the wheels are starting to come off the ground or anything like that. We're just going to jack it up enough to where we're supporting a little bit of that weight of the transmission, and then we can remove the transmission mount. Now I would also suggest using a jack stand up underneath the transmission. I like to put a jack stand right about here. And I would also suggest that you have a 2x4 block on top of it as well. I don't have that in this particular instance here. However, I would suggest that for you. And you want that jack stand up underneath the transmission just in case something were to happen. Ideally, you want to use a jack that you trust and you know is going to hold things up and it's not going to fail on you. But regardless, just as a little safety net there, put you a jack stand up underneath just in case. Also guys, if you choose to do this, you do this at your own risk. I do not guarantee that you're going to be safe doing this. I do not guarantee that you're not going to injure yourself. You have to be very careful. This is dangerous, and this is the way that I do it, and I've been doing it this way for years, and I've done it successfully that way. However, I do not guarantee that you will do this and not get hurt doing it this way. Okay, now once we got our transmission supported with the jack, we're going to go ahead and remove this particular bracket right here. Then we can remove the engine mount. To do that, we'll need to remove this wire harness right here, get it out of the way. Now, this bracket is held on by 3 nuts, and they are 15mm heads on those nuts, and then there's one 13mm, or one bolt that has a 13mm head on it right here. And then we've also got this long bolt that actually goes through the bracket and the engine mount, transmission mount, excuse me, that has an 18mm head on it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start loosening up these nuts to start out with, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. We're going to loosen these up first, and then we're going to take the big bolt out. But let me show you how I'm going to do that, and it'll make sense to you here in just a minute. I'm not going to take that nut all the way out. I'm not going to take that one all the way out either. I'm going to leave some threads in it, and you'll see why. All right, now, when we go to loosen up this bolt here, you're going to see that the transmission is going to want to drop on me. Now, I do have the jack up underneath it. It is supporting it. There is pressure on the jack, pushing up on the transmission, but things are going to adjust here in just a second. Watch this. I'm going to loosen this bolt up here. All right, you see that? Now, that's kind of like a little parachute for you. Like I said, you got to have a little bit of pressure on the transmission before you even attempt this. A little bit of pressure from the jack to the transmission, that is. But you don't know exactly what kind of pressure you actually need until you know. So these nuts are actually holding this bracket in place here. Excuse me, I misspoke right there. What I meant to say was that they actually hold the transmission up, and they serve as kind of like a safety net to prevent the transmission from falling too far. Now, we know that we could put a little bit more pressure or jack the transmission up just a little bit more, just based on the fact that it dropped down a little bit there. So I'm gonna jack it up just a little bit. All right, and you see, now I got a little space between that nut and the bracket. This nut spins easy, this nut spins easy. So there's enough pressure on the transmission right now, or the jack's holding up the transmission adequately now. We can go ahead and remove all of these fasteners here because the transmission is supported. All right, now this bolt right here, like I said, it's got an 18mm head on it. If you don't have an impact like I do, a breaker bar would probably be very helpful for you. It shouldn't be too terribly hard to loosen that bolt up, but it could be. So breaker bar may help. And that's got an 18mm head on it, like I said. Let's go ahead and loosen that up. All right, now, this nut on the back side here, you'll notice it's got a little lobe on it. This is what keeps the nut stationary as you're trying to tighten up the bolt or loosen the bolt. That way the bolt or the nut doesn't just keep spinning on you. Kind of handy. We should be able to slide that right out. Set that to the side. Now our whole bracket should come right up. Just set that to the side. Now our engine mount or transmission mount, I don't know why I keep calling it an engine mount, fully exposed now. We can go ahead and remove it. All right, so this mount is held on by 4 bolts, one right here, one right there, one right there, and then there's another one right there in the shadows, but they have 13mm heads on them, and we're going to go ahead and loosen them up. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with this bolt because it's the hardest one to get to. I'm just using a regular wrench on it. Now, these bolts can be a little tight, so if you got a long throw or a wrench that's kind of long, even better. And if you got a ratcheting wrench, even better. Now, I've already broken this free with the box end earlier. I would definitely suggest using the box end on this when you're loosening it initially. Once you get it loosened or starting to move, you can then switch to the open end there. But definitely a ratcheting wrench is ideal for this. Also, if you're having a hard time getting enough of a spin on the ratchet there, you see this little bracket that supports the battery tray? You can remove it. It's got 2 bolts that hold it on right there. They're a little difficult to get to as well, but if you need to, you can remove that. That way you can get a little bit more swing on that bolt there. All right, now, I've got it this far, and I've got a ratchet wrench, by the way, guys. It's just broken right now. But I'm going to tell you what, it took me forever and a day to get it out this far. Now, something you want to be aware of, you see this transmission cooler line right here? Let me see if I can get some light on it for you so you can actually see it, not just see the shadow. That transmission cooler line right there might get in the way of that bolt actually coming out all the way. So to help you get the bolt out, you may want to lower the transmission just a little bit. That should give you the clearance to get that bolt out. Just lower it down just a little bit and be careful while you do it. Now, something I want to bring your attention to, if you lower the transmission to move that transmission cooler line down just a little bit in order to get that bolt out, you need to do it in kind of a controlled manner. You want to release the pressure release on the jack slowly, very slowly, and just let that transmission drop very slowly and in a controlled manner. Now, if you've got your jack stand up underneath, like I mentioned earlier, and by the way, don't forget your 2x4 block on top of it. That'll give a little cushion between it and the transmission there. But if you've got your jack stand in place, you should be okay. If it does drop too quickly, that will catch it and keep it from falling too far. But regardless, bring it down in a slow and controlled manner. Slow is safe. All right, once you got it loose enough, you should be able to take it out by hand. What a booger. we go. All right, let's get our other bolt out. Let's get it out the rest of the way by hand. There we go. Now these two bolts right here, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use my impact on them. I think I deserve to after that. I'm using an extension, a universal adapter, and a 13mm socket on this one. And there we have it, guys. There is our transmission mount. And I'd say that thing's pretty well broken. Let's go ahead and get our bolts out of there. Set those off to the side there. All right, once we got our mount out of the way, never a bad idea. Go ahead and clean up the mounting surface really well with a wire brush. Just make sure you don't have any dirt and debris or any rust that might hinder your mount from mounting up correctly. Okay, we're ready to put our engine mount on. However, I want to bring your attention to something. These are the bolts that hold the engine mount to the frame or to the unibody. A lot of times, manufacturers actually recommend replacing the fasteners. You always want to refer to your repair manual and follow its instructions over anything you might find in this video here. But for my vehicle, and in my case, I'm going to be using thread locker instead of replacing the fasteners. All right, let's put our transmission mount into place here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put these bolts in. I'm just going to put them in finger tight at the very beginning here, or get them started at least, get the threads going. It's always a good idea to get your threads started by hand, and you get a few threads in, that way you don't cross thread anything, because this is an area where you don't want to be using a tap and die. That's kind of hard to get to these parts here. And these right here, these bolts, or these bolt holes in particular, would probably require that you take the transmission out to fix these. So be careful. Start your bolts out by hand. Get a good bit of thread in there before you actually put a wrench on it, okay? I'm going to go ahead and use my impact on these. Now, I'm not going to tighten them up all the way. I'm going to just kind of cinch them down and leave them a little loose. All right, so as mentioned, they are still a little bit loose. I got a little bit of movement with the engine mount there. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to kind of cinch them all down uniformly. So I'm going to tighten these bolts up as well, and I'm going to get them just before they're good and tight, and I'm going to kind of snug them all down. That way it kind of tightens up uniformly per se. All right, so we got all 4 bolts ran down. They're still just a little bit loose, but the mount is actually making full contact on this bracket here and this bracket. So I'm actually going to start by torquing this bolt down first. There we go. I'm just going to do like a crisscross pattern. Now we're going to do this one. And yes, this is not a torque wrench. I would suggest using a torque wrench to do this, but I'm not using a torque wrench. Also, guys, I'm not using a manual while I'm doing this. I don't have torque specifications for you, unfortunately. You'll need to get a repair manual and get those specs from your repair manual. Now these, if you were to use a torque wrench on these, the 2 bolts that go this way towards the transmission, you probably are going to need some kind of an adapter to actually torque those down properly. Let's see here. Maybe this one here. There we go. Also, one more thing, I got to call myself out on this. You always want to pull a wrench or pull a ratchet. I'm sitting here pushing it. That is potentially dangerous. It could slip and I could hit my knuckle on this hose clamp here or bust my knuckle on the thermostat outlet. That's not the best way to do it. it's kind of hard to film these things and do them at the same time and do everything by the book. So just want to point that out for you. All right, once we got our 4 bolts tightened up, we can go ahead and put our bracket on. Go ahead and slide it into place like so. A little bit of a tight fit. Now you may find out that these studs aren't really lining up. You can take and push the engine or the transmission backwards just a little bit to line those up and to slide that into place there. Careful what you're prying on. I'm just applying a little bit of pressure to the front of the transmission here on one of the pan bolts. Not a lot, just a little pressure to push it back. Don't damage your, actually it's a side pan, don't damage anything on the transmission while you do that. All right, we got that slid on. Now, as mentioned before, a lot of times manufacturers suggest replacing the fasteners. I'm using Loctite. Use your repair manual and go by that instead of what I'm doing, of course. This is what I'm doing in my case here. And high strength is probably, which is what I'm using, it's probably not the best thing, but this is what I've got. This is what I'm going to use, and if I've got to go back in there and do this again, I guess I'm going to be the one that's suffering. So run these down here just by finger. Get them started by finger first. You don't want to cross thread anything. All right, you see our bolt hole for our main bolt. It's not lined up, so we're going to have to jack up the transmission a bit to get that lined up there. I'll be applying a little Loctite to this one as well. There we go. Run it all the way through there. And I'm going to put the nut on the back side and thread the bolt into that nut by hand. Now I'm going to go ahead and run these down. I'm going to run the bolt down first, and I'm not tightening it up. I'm just going to run it down and make contact. Let's see here. I did that very lightly. Run this one down here. Very lightly. I'm not even tightening them up more than maybe a foot-pound or two. Now, we got our bolt, this main bolt in. We got the nut on. We got these three nuts ran down. And oh, by the way, these studs here.
At this point here, guys, I had a little bit of an afterthought. I should have demonstrated torquing down the studs that actually go into the transmission before I put that bracket on and the fasteners. So do yourself a favor and check the torque on those studs before you actually put the bracket on. You'll need an inverted Torx socket for that. It is possible that these studs could become loose during the removal process, so they need to be verified that they are actually tight.
All right, so once we got the bracket on and the nuts ran down, we can then go ahead and remove our transmission jack. And you'll see the transmission kind of fall a little bit. That's okay. Of course, you want to remove your jack stand first before you lower your transmission. Let's go ahead and get that out. Okay, now once the transmission jack has been removed, we can go ahead and tighten these up. I'm going to start with the bolt in the back. And as mentioned, I'm not using a manual. I don't have torque specs, and I'm not using a torque wrench, but I would suggest that you do that. Go ahead and torque these down. And I'm doing this in a crisscross pattern. I'm just going to run down the main bolt. go. And torque it down by hand. There we go. Go ahead and reconnect our wire harness. All right, so at this point we can go ahead and put our battery tray back in. However, on my vehicle here, I noticed that this bolt hole doesn't quite line up with this battery tray bolt hole anymore. This is kind of an off-brand transmission mount. So I'm going to let that slide for right now. I would advise replacing all the bolts in your battery tray. However, mine doesn't line up, and there's not a whole lot I can do about that at this point. I can get another mount, but that'll be at a later date, of course. So we'll go ahead and put our battery tray back in here. And we're just going to slide it in. We got to put it up over that stud there. Just like that. Go ahead and put our nut on. Put our bolt in. Let's go ahead and snug them down. Let's go ahead and put our connector back into place here. There we go. Let's put our battery back in. Let's put our hold down cleat into place here. Start that by hand. Snug it down. We'll go ahead and connect our positive battery clamp. We're going to leave the negative one disconnected for the time being. Snug it up. Now I do have some corrosion, as you can see here. That does need to be taken care of, but for the purposes of this video, we won't go into that. Let's go ahead and put our lower air filter housing on. You'll notice that there's some receptacles down here. They received these cleats that are on the bottom of the air filter housing here. We're going to go ahead and line those cleats up with the holes and slide it right into place. And this little snorkel right here, you got to line it up with the male portion there and just push down. Get this lined up. There we go. Let's go ahead and put our bracket back on. This thing only goes on one way. It has a little cleat that goes in a receptacle right here. And of course, we're going to run these bolts down by hand first so we don't cross thread them. And we'll go ahead and snug these up. Now, I know you see me tightening up a lot of these fasteners with an impact, and I'm not using a torque wrench on these things. There are torque specs for all of these fasteners, and I would highly advise to use a torque wrench and torque them down properly. Let's go ahead and put our air filter back in. And this is that snorkel that I was wrestling with a little bit. You can see there's a little male portion right there that goes to the front of the vehicle that this actually slips right over, just for clarification. Okay, we'll need to put our air inlet duct back onto the throttle body. Make sure it's all the way up to where it stops and is fully secured onto the throttle body. Go ahead and take the upper air filter housing and slide it into place on the lower air filter housing. You have these little blades here that go into receptacles back there. You're going to have to pull up just a little bit on the front of it right here, and then slide it rearward to get it in those slots. Put the air filter housing down, or the upper air filter housing down. Go ahead and clamp the air filter housings together. There we go. We can go ahead and reconnect our mass airflow sensor. Make sure it snaps into place. Give it a tug, make sure it's secure. Once it's on there and secure, push your lock in. We'll then reconnect this hose, or this line, back up into the air inlet. Just got to push it in until it's all the way seated like that. And don't forget our PCV breather here. You have to put it back on as well. Make sure it snaps into place. Give it a tug. Make sure it's secure. And this here is the throttle body that has the air inlet duct going to it. You can see, I hope you can, there's a little divot that receives a little bit of that rubber from the air inlet tube. You'll know it's pushed all the way up when that divot receives that piece of rubber. There we go. See that right there? That's all the way up. Also, guys, make sure that that air inlet tube doesn't fold in on itself. There's a lot of instances where that thing will fold in on itself, and actually cause a little bit of a unmetered air leak. You want to make sure that the lip of the air inlet tube, all the way around the circumference of the air inlet tube, is all the way on the throttle body. Let's go ahead and tighten up our hose clamp on the air inlet tube where it meets the throttle body. Let's go ahead and reconnect our negative battery clamp. There you go. Well, folks, that is it. Of course, at this point, you can release your parking brake and unchalk the rear wheels. Folks, I certainly hope that this helped somebody. Please read the entire description down below this video before you attempt this or apply any of this knowledge. There may be some things I need to clarify, and that's where I do that. And also, please read the disclaimer at the very end of it as well. Please like and subscribe, guys. Have a good one.